Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about simplifying subsurface scattering in Redshift. Subsurface scattering is far too complicated and technical for most of us, and in this lesson we will simplify it so you can focus on being more creative and less technical. So let's jump in and see what it's all about. Okay, so today we're talking about simplifying subsurface scattering in Redshift. So if you've ever tried to do subsurface scattering in Redshift, you'll probably find what I found, which is it's very cryptic and it's very technical. And a lot of times as designers, you don't really care about that technical aspect. You know, if you just want to make something that looks cool, you don't necessarily need to know like what the exact scientific values are. And for me, it was really frustrating because I would always just kind of go in there and drag sliders around, and I really couldn't get the results that I wanted to because I didn't understand what was actually happening. And the truth of the matter is I only care so much about technical stuff, and I have my limitations, and I think that with inside Redshift Subsurface Scattering, I reach my limitations. So I started thinking like, well, why not just make a video that simplifies it for you guys, and kind of puts it into terms that I think we'll all understand, and hopefully we can, make cool stuff with it. So again, this is not going to be dry and technical. I'm hoping that I can make it simple for you. And to all you 3D hardcore guys, please don't be mad at me because this is not supposed to be real world scenarios as far as the numbers that we're piping in. This is more of layman's terms and how we can get something to look nice. So let's go ahead and jump in and do it. So first things first, subsurface scattering, without getting too technical, what is it? All it is simply is it's the way that light is transmitted through an object. So I grabbed a couple examples here. One we probably all know, if you hold a flashlight up to your fingers, you kind of get this glow that happens around, and it's the way that the light kind of goes through and it comes out at a different angle. And depending upon the material, this light will react differently. Here we have like a glass material, and you can obviously tell it's looking thinner, whereas like a plastic material is going to be a little thicker. And this is really important to understand because depending upon your model itself is going to affect the way that the light is going to react. So if you have a model that, again, like this guy has a big belly, you'll see that it feels thicker here, whereas on the sides it's feeling a lot thinner. Same with the fingers here. On the fingers it's pretty much solid, right? But on the edges where it's thinner and there's less muscle and stuff like that going on, and more pure skin, you're getting these lights that you can actually see kind of bouncing through. So that's really all it is. I mean, we all kind of know what it is, but without going too deep into it, it's just basically the way that light's transmitted through an object. So with lighting in general, of course your objects are going to be affected by your lights, right? So if I have a light that is really far in the distance and my hands are right here, most likely I'm not going to get this effect here. So for subsurface scattering, it's pretty important that you take into account what your lights are doing and how they're reacting. When I look at this bird here, I can tell there's a light not too far away from this. This isn't something where there's a light, 50 meters away or whatever. This light's pretty close, and just as humans, we just know that. Same with the bunny. Like, we know that this window is creating this. So it's something that is very, very important is your lighting setups when you're doing your subsurface scattering. So knowing that, let's look at the lighting setup I have here. So I did a pretty simple 3-point lighting setup, and all it is I have, make this a little bigger, I have a key light here. Okay, so I have a key light that's coming from the top. It's this light right here. And then I have a rim light that I'm using for a lot of what will be our subsurface scattering, which is right here. You'll see it's kind of positioned behind him. And then I have a kicker light that is kind of just filling in everything over here. So I'll just do that. It's kind of giving it some shape over here. But what I'm doing is I'm creating a hotspot, right? So the rim light is essentially is going to be doing most of the work for the subsurface scattering. Not all of it, but it's going to be a lot. So again, if you can imagine a flashlight to the back of your hand, that's kind of what's happening here. This is the flashlight to the back of the hand that's happening here. All right, so that's the lighting setup. And again, I can't stress enough how important the lighting setup is for this. And I'll demonstrate after we build the material and everything about how if you just slap in HDRI, a lot of times you don't get as cool of results. All right, so what I want to do is I want to start with a clean material. So let's go and create a material. Let's take that material and let's apply it on top of this beak right here. Okay. Now let's go ahead and let's step inside the material. And if you do or don't know, subsurface scattering is all the way at the bottom here. But before we do that, I want to turn everything else off. That way there's no variables affecting what we're looking at. So let's turn off our diffuse color and our reflection weight. All right, and now under subsurface scattering, what you're going to see, this is single subsurface scattering. There's also, you're going to see multi-subsurface scattering, which we'll talk about in another lesson. But for today, we're going to do single surface. What you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of technical, stuff here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down into the order of operations and kind of what they all mean. All right, so the first thing you need to do is you need to turn it on, right? By default, it's off. And to turn it on, you need to go to scatter scale. So scatter scale. So most of us will probably come in here and put like 1. And right away we get kind of a cool result. It's kind of a milky looking result. But what is it doing? So scatter scale is essentially, think of it like a Fresnel, okay? So, or a curvature map. Basically what it does is it pushes your subsurface scattering effect from the inside to the outside. Okay, I also want to apply this to this object right here, so you can kind of see the difference between two objects and how each object is affected differently. All right, so we have our scatter scale at 1. Now let's go ahead and move this down. And as I move it down, you're going to see that everything kind of collapses in and it becomes a little bit more glassy looking almost. And what that's doing, if you think of it as like a curvature map or a Fresnel or what have you, it's bringing everything to the center, right? So if I think if I do it fast, you'll be able to tell. So if you see how if the more I pull it to the right, it's creating less of an effect and it's making it feel denser. So you can kind of think of this, yeah, it's like your initial density, but it's also where the light is falling, right? Like, so do you want it to fall in the center or do you want it to fall on the edges? You know, if you look here, right now it's just hidden on these edges, but if I come in, it's going to pull it in. Same with the beak. And also you're noticing what I talked about earlier, where the thicker the part of the model, the less of the translucency you're going to get. And the thinner the part, the more of it. So you can see we're getting more of that translucency happening here with the beak because the beak is thinner. And this blue is actually, the rim light is blue itself, so don't be confused by that. All right, so very simple. Always start with scatter scale. That essentially turns it on, and then it's kind of like your power almost. All right. So next, what do we do next? So next, what I would do is I would choose my color, right? So what color do I want this subsurface scattering to be? All right, so I'm going to pick something kind of extreme here. You can go to transmittance color. Transmittance color is power, but it's mostly color. I would just think of it as color. It can be power. So if I go pure black, there's going to be nothing. So it's also power, but in the efforts of simplifying, think of it as color and color alone. It's pretty much color. So let's go ahead and let's pick something, I don't know, like that or something. That's fine. All right, so we've got our color. And now if we kind of pull in this more and more and more, you'll see that we're starting to get kind of that like pink color. But you might be saying like, well, why is it not this color, right? I want it to be this color, and I want it to look like this, and I want it to be this color, but it's very kind of muted and kind of pastel-y and taken back. Well, the reason why that is because it's actually, again, you're diffusing it so much through the scatter scale that color itself is actually being reduced. So how do we get this color? How do we get this look to be this color? This is where the absorption scale comes in to handy. So you can think of absorption scale as like, it's like your intensity, it's your saturation values. I promise I won't get too technical, but it's technically multiplying this. So it's gonna make it more intense. So if I go to 0.2, you're gonna see it's gonna get more intense. If I go to 0.5, all of a sudden we're starting to get closer and closer to this color. Now eventually you will break it, but you can see now we're getting kind of closer and closer to this color that we have here. And then if we pull this out even more, you'll see it's just going to go to the edges. And then we could try like 0.2. Yeah, it's just, it's your saturation. Think of it as your saturation, but it will also make things look thicker the higher it goes, because typically if something has more color that's richer, it's typically thicker. Whereas if I go down to 0.05, it feels thinner now. So you really have to think of this as like your saturation. So far we have our Fresnel, or our power, I guess you could say here. We have our color, and now we have the intensity of our color, right? And these kind of all work together, and it's a dance. It's a total dance to get these to work together. So that's good. So now, if I want to come in here, kind of make it like that, and then like, what if I went like 0.3? Yeah, see, now you're getting this like kind of rich color. And again, this is only subsurface, we have no reflection on or anything. All right, so let's go back to 0.1, and let's put it maybe somewhere in there. So now we have some definition in here, but we also have some nice translucency going. Okay, so next we have the scatter cof. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I find this one to be kind of the hardest to describe. But the best way I can describe it is it's kind of your detail. It's the detail of your look. So let's say that I have, I'm going to actually crank this up quite a bit. So remember, if we increase our scatter scale, that's going to make it just kind of go to the edges. So let's say we like this look, but man, I want it to be kind of foggy inside. I like this detail that's happening, but I still want it to be kind of foggy inside. I want it to feel like kind of glass. Like I want it to feel like this, right? I want it to feel nice like that. So if you come in here, general rule of thumb is leave it black and white. If you want kind of more realistic results, for now we're going to leave it black and white. We can talk about the color in just a second. So let's just go ahead and decrease the power. So now what's happening is I've essentially made it to where I'm keeping this detail here, but I'm also making it feel more, foggy and translucent inside. So it's kind of like your transparency power, I guess. It's so hard to describe. But I can come in here now, and if I crank this up to like 5, and then I keep bringing this down, you see that I'm still able to maintain some of this detail that I like, whereas before I wasn't able to get this kind of detail without it feeling really thick like this. You know what I mean? So it's a way of, you got to think of it as like, it's almost the density inside. It's like the transparency of the fogginess that's happening inside. So the more you reduce it, the more foggy it gets. Okay. So again, these are all a dance, and you really have to kind of mess with them to get the exact look that you want to. I find that this isn't the most useful for me. I usually can get a halfway decent look without messing with this. You can also come in here and just color it if you want, and you'll get some really kind of wacky results if you do that. That's probably too close of a color. Let's do something else. Yeah, you get some kind of like wacky results, and it's kind of nice, kind of like a bubblegum vibe here that's happening. So it's more of like, it could be really nice for like designy type work, which is what we're talking about. So think of scatter cof as basically it's like the power of your it's not the scale of your subsurface, it's like the power of your subsurface. All right, so for now let's put the power back to 1, and let's go back to somewhere in there. So where do we have here? So again, because I know this is confusing, we have the scale. The scale is our Fresnel, our curvature. We have our color. We have our saturation values. How saturated is this color going to be? That's what the absorption scale is. And then we have this, which is kind of how powerful is it going to be, the scatter cof. How powerful is this entire effect going to be? How foggy or not foggy. And when you're creating your materials, of course, our eye knows different things, and this is where it's up to you as an artist to figure out, okay, I want to make glass, or I want to make a marble or whatever, what are those values? What is this combination? So next, let's talk about phase. And this is the last part that we're going to talk about with inside subsurface scattering. So phase is basically the direction that the light bounces out once it's entered through the object. So it's pretty simple to understand. So values of 0 to 1 are going to bounce, the light is going to bounce away. The light that's traveling through the object is going to bounce away from the light that is hitting it. So if I come over here, you'll see that it's going to exit out this way and make it really dark. Whereas if I come here, it's going to actually try to go back to the light. It's going to try to reverse itself and go back to where it came from. Okay, so it's going to try to go back. The light's coming in this way and it's going to try to go back out that way. So again, this is one of those situations where if I just kind of drag the slider a little bit, you can kind of tell what's happening. So again, when I go to the right, it's going away from the light, and when I go to the left, it's trying to go back towards that light. So you can just think of this as the angle that the light bounces. That's really all it is, and it defaults at 0. And this is one of those situations where if you do want more definition, potentially, you can get that by moving this around a little bit. So that's cool. So that brings us through all of the subsurface, besides the samples. I think we all know what samples are. Through all the options with the exception of this one. So transmittance is, to the best of my knowledge, transmittance is basically less scientific, which is what this is about. And extinction is more scientific. So I don't even mess with extinction. I just keep it to transmittance, and for me it works fine because most of the time the stuff I'm working on is not real world scenarios. So feel free to read up on this if you want, but I stick to this one. So lastly, let's talk about if you don't want pure subsurface scattering on. So if you remember at the beginning, we turned off our reflection and our diffuse color. Now, reflection's easy. If you just turn that back on, you'll see you're going to get your highlights back on here, and you can start making kind of a glassy look if you want. And actually, you know what, for this purpose of demonstration, let's just go to a simple kind of yellow color here because I want you to actually be able to see. So, so now we just have like this yellow color. We have a reflection on here, and we'll just roughen that up. Actually, you know what, let's just put it there, something like that. And then when we start reintroducing our diffuse, let's go ahead and make this like just a crazy color. Let's make this like a green color, and then let's start reintroducing it. And as I reintroduce it, you're going to see it kind of coming in here. And this is where, again, it becomes a dance. You know, all of a sudden now my lighting's too hot because we were going, again, for that pure subsurface look that requires that kind of hot light to it. But as you introduce your diffuse, you see it starts to get blown out. So again, it becomes a dance, and it becomes like, all right, well, how much of this do I want? I mean, this looks pretty, I mean, it's getting really hot here, but the colors that are mixing here are pretty nice. So what you can do is you can reintroduce your diffuse, and you can get some either realistic looks or not realistic looks. So like obviously this is super extreme, but if you wanted to do like a skin color or like a bone color, like come here, and then you could just like put this back to here, and then maybe bring it down a bit. Yeah, so now you're getting kind of that like nice, I don't know, that nice kind of like, could be like a cool plastic color. If we wanted to make it a little more waxy, come in here. Now you're getting more like a waxy look. I don't know if we did that, it's even more waxy. So this is where, you just kind of have to mess with these to kind of get the look that you want. And it does all come down to your lighting. And the settings that you have, and the diffuse is also going to make it feel thicker, of course, because now less light's traveling through it. So at the beginning I mentioned about how the light will affect how your object looks in the end. So real quickly, I just want to show you, if we turn off all these lights and we just put on an HDRI, you'll see we're still getting this like effect here, but it just doesn't have that pop to it anymore. It doesn't have it's just not as nice. So I feel like most of the time when I'm doing this stuff, you have to actually put, real lights in there. HDRIs usually don't cut it because this looks like shit. So one thing just to keep in mind, that HDRIs can be good for a fill light, but a lot of times I find that you just can't get away with it. So cool, that brings us to the end. I hope this is simplified subsurface scattering for you. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I'll see you on the next one.